right. Hello, ranchers. Welcome to Adventure Stories number 6. Today, we are talking with Lily Mockerman, who is a revenue management professional. So, what is a revenue management professional is one thing we'll learn. But one thing that I thought was interesting was that of all the ranchers that I've talked to, no one has ever told me that they have worked with a revenue management professional. Um, I am right now looking at Lily's resort just to let you know a little bit of the impact those guys can have on resorts. One of her one of her very first positions, she went ahead and increased revenue $100,000 for an employer within the first 6 months of her being hired. So those guys, can really have an impact. And can they have as much of an impact for ranches? That's what I want to learn. So come join us as we learn from Lily. And Lily, welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here. I am a big fan of guest ranches personally, and so excited to be able to talk with you guys more.
So we met you through a connection that is actually now somewhat part of the guest ranching family. You are based in Tucson, so you have heard and seen a lot of our friends at Tanque Verde and White Stallion. And you, in your past positions, you've worked at Sheraton, you've worked at Best Western, and now you have your own firm. You do consulting for revenue management. So yeah, please explain, in the grand scheme of things, what is it that you guys do? And we'll take it from there.
Absolutely. It's a great time to be in the field of revenue management, despite the fact that 2020 is an interesting year for all of us. But there's so much that you can capitalize on, and the revenue management landscape is really evolving. So I began my career in hotels, gosh, I want to say 15 years ago now. And I've worked up through, as Matt mentioned, different brands, some independent properties, some resorts, some regular properties. We've worked with vacation rental properties. We have done some work for Guest Ranch in the past, and we're basically kind of a jack of all trades for anything within the broad field of revenue management. So when I say revenue management, essentially we're talking about business strategy, right? We're looking at the holistic planning for the overall resort or hotel or ranch or whatever type of entity we're working with. And we're seeing, okay, how can you make the most possible money based on supply and demand factors? So how do you make sure that you're selling the right thing at the right price to the right guest at the right time in order to generate the most money possible? So the exciting part about that going into 2021 is that 2020 has really brought to light something that we've championed for a long time, which is a need to focus on profitability. So not just what you're generating on the top line from different initiatives, but also how that flows through to the bottom line, because frankly, we are all here to make money. So your typical really good revenue manager is going to have an ownership mindset and really have the interests of the owner at heart in order to make sure that they're making the most money possible. So that's kind of the short version of what we do in revenue management.
Yeah, it's one thing that's always really funny to me is that there's a lot of those ranches that are owned by families and their family businesses, lifestyle businesses, but everyone is still like very aware that you can't ignore the business and family business. So it's so great to see how studious everyone is every time that we do something like this. People really tune in and they're excited to find those 4 or 5 tips that they can apply and see some return on. So I'm sure that a lot of the people that are listening to this right now, they think, oh, how can my ranch that has 10 room and a pretty short season, how can I apply what Lily is going to tell me that she's been doing for Best Western downtown Tucson with 500 rooms. So that's something that, I don't think that all the levers that you're gonna let us know will apply for ranches, but I do think that we'll find out that several will. And as we've seen when we had the our past partners on this, is if you just find 3 or 4 things that you can work on consistently during the year, it does move the needle. So one thing that I think, and that I'm excited to hear what you think, is that a lot of ranches might be a little too conservative with the way that they raise their rates. When people say to me, "Hey, we have the same guests that come back year after year," I think that's great and I love it, and I think that's a big part of what makes the industry special. But I also think that's, you know, is it really the kind of product that people would be able to afford year after year? So what do you think about that? When you hear someone say, "Hey, like people come back every year," is it a good thing, or is it like something where you're saying like, "Oh, maybe they might be leaving a little bit of money on the table"?
Yeah, I think that returning guests are always a good thing. You like part of your goal in business is to create raving fans, right? Not only do they create repeat business for you, but they tell their friends, and then their friends create business for you. That's the number one sales lever you really have to your advantage, is to give people a great experience when they're on property. Now, where pricing comes in is the value of the experience at a disadvantage or an advantage to the actual price of the experience. So there's a couple things that you can look at here to understand whether or not you're leaving money on the table. And one is occupancy. If you're occupied pretty much 100% all of your high season, or even more all year round, you're definitely priced too low, right? You have room to flex that because it's really based on typical microeconomics. You've got your supply and demand curve, right? So you've got supply and then price, and then demand is a direct relationship to the way that you move your price and how much supply you have. So for you guys, supply would be a number of unreserved rooms, right? So it's not the number of total rooms that you have, unless none of them are reserved. It's how many are left. So sometimes when you're operating in a vacuum, which I think happens a lot with ranches, because you may not have a direct competitor, even in the state in some cases, that you can't really correlate your pricing, because a Tucson resort might be totally different than a Wyoming resort in terms of what people are willing to pay. So while you can look at those other resorts as sort of a reference point, it's not as direct of a correlation as 5 downtown hotels that are within walking distance of each other and are very similar. So that's one of the things that you can look at the benchmarking, but really in general, if you see that you're constantly doing extremely well with occupancy to the point where you're turning away demand, that's what we call unconstrained demand. Like, how much could you take if you had all the rooms in the world at a moment's notice? So let's say you have 50 units and you're getting constant demand on a given night for 75 units. You probably have pretty significant price opportunity, which is why it's important to really measure how many people you're turning away and be keeping track of that, charting that somewhere for any given date. Those could be called turnaways, denials, or regrets, depending on how that's happening. So the number of people that you're turning away is also a really good indicator if it's based on availability, because within those 75 people that want to stay with you, there's going to be bands. Some will be willing to pay this much, some this much, and some this much. So by raising your price, you're essentially eliminating some of your demand, which is okay as long as you still have demand for full capacity.
Yeah.
So that's probably the number one thing that I would say at any period of time, is to look at that overall demand. Um, the second thing I would look at is if you're measuring guest satisfaction, which I always encourage you to send post-stay surveys to your guests, because that contains a lot of valuable information that you can use to make the experience better and to make the overall business better. If you're constantly getting a, "Wow, this was a great value for the price that I paid," that should like make your heart hurt a little bit, because that means they would have paid more for the experience. So you want to make sure that you're advertising this great experience properly so people know what they're getting. But if you're getting really, really high marks on that price to value relationship, then you probably have some room to increase your pricing.
Sounds great. So, um, and it is a little nerve wracking, right? Because like, when you were telling me more about how you would do that, you have in more of the retail hotel market, there's all that data and all those reports that tell you very accurately, hey, you should feel pretty comfortable raising to this level. It is true for ranches, even in Colorado and Jackson, Wyoming, that have like quite a big density of ranches. You're still talking about a dozen in close proximity or 15, and so it is hard. I don't think you get the full impact. So there's a lot of people do benchmark compared to their comparable resorts, but at the end of the day, everyone I've talked to, it always kind of feels like a gut feel.
Mhm.
And it's one of those things. Like I don't envy them the decision, because it's do I fill up, or just do I get overly enthusiastic with raising my rate and find out that no one wants to come anymore.
Yeah. And
um,
it definitely also depends on how you're operating your resort right now. If you're using a technology like Check-in Sherpa or some other type of software focused tracking system for guest check-ins and checkouts, then with our company, for example, we've just signed a partnership with a BI tool, which stands for Business Intelligence, and it can plug into a software via their API and extract data in a way that allows you to actually see business insights, how you're pacing, what your occupancy levels are like, and things like that. It does stop short of turnaways unless there's a way that you're actually tracking that in your software. But at least with that data aggregated into more business style reports, it gives you an opportunity to really make some of those key decisions. If you've been doing everything by hand, it may be a little bit more difficult to go back through and kind of compile that data, but we recommend that you do it because 90% of the time, I would say, when I talk with somebody and they say, oh, I know for sure that things happen this way for me over this period of time, when we go back into the data, it's not exactly the way that they remember it, because human memories are notoriously faulty and we attach emotions to things, whereas with data, there is no emotion. So while you may have felt like, oh, we always sell out every Saturday in the summer, that may just be because you were really busy, but in fact, you were only achieving 85% occupancy. So, those are some of the reasons that we try to use data to drive as many decisions as possible.
One thing that another thing that I think is um, coming more to the forefront for ranchers is the aspect of channels. Right now, in terms of marketing channels, the ranching industry is fairly simple. You have the Dude Ranchers Association website, which sends a lot of traffic. You have a few of those other directory sites, duderanch.com, duderanches.com, guest ranches, etc. They do matter and send quite a bit of traffic. TripAdvisor and Google are, the over achieving ones. Not of the average resort, not the White Stallions and Tenke Verde, which are huge. There's not a lot of work done via travel agents or online travel agencies, and so I think that contributes to also um, that aspect of, I don't know how much I can raise my rates, because I don't really have a good handle of how much demand there is for my product. So one question I have for you is, um, if you were one of those ranches, would you go after every channel out there? Try to get as many places you can. Um, Actually, I think some people did that in the early days of Expedia and got really annoyed with being sent people that had no idea what a guest ranch is. So that's not
Right.
probably the right way to go through. But where's the middle ground, right? How much do you work with those channels that do charge you a commission versus go it alone and through like the existing directories that everyone uses.
I think that when it comes to this, hotels will often use things like Expedia and Booking.com for what we call the billboard effect, which is an often disputed, does this really exist or does this not exist? So I think there's some value to being on multiple channels for that reason. However, I also agree that, with your typical ranch setup, you're probably including some meals, you're probably requiring, at least a 3-night stay. Maybe it's a week stay. Maybe you only allow check-in on certain days. And those types of OTAs aren't well set up for that. So typically your Expedia or Booking.com or Priceline traveler is going to be looking to stay in your area and then deciding where to stay. You really want to target the market that is, I know I want to stay at a guest ranch or some type of experience driven, right? It might be a resort with other activities like spa, golf, or hiking, or a guest ranch, but it's likely to be another experience driven or adventure driven, if you will, property that they're looking for. And so they may go about finding those in different ways. So, depending on what you cater to and what some of your restrictions are, those are things to keep in mind, and also what your business levels are. So, if you are selling out every high season, but you're doing miserably in low season, you may want to look at engaging with some like wholesalers or tour and travel groups that take people through for experiential travel and come either year round or specifically during your off season would be even better. So some of those might be partners like Tarico or GTA or Hotel Beds, maybe, but since it has the word hotel in the name, typically you're not going to get as good of a result there. So you really want to look at your individual needs. What I recommend typically for experience driven is that a lot of that time and money is invested actually in marketing. So it's a kind of a break between the channels. Google, however, 100% be all over your Google listing and make that as shiny as you can and make sure that you're paying for that link to your own website, because that is one of the first places people are going to search is guest ranches in Tucson, for example. I feel like we're picking on Tucson today, but that's okay. So, if they're looking for guest ranches in Tucson, you need to be in those top results. And even better if it automatically links to your Google listing and they think that you're the only one, right? So, investing in a strong marketing campaign and working with people who really know the ins and outs of analytical digital marketing is so key to also making the revenue management function successful there, because that's how you're attracting attention of guests who are more likely your target customer. On the other hand, if you are really struggling and not doing much business, it may be worth just giving things like Expedia or Booking.com a shot and making sure that your profile is as clear as it possibly can be, from the name of the property to the description of the property, the description of the room types, whatever that may be. And keep in mind that anything greater than a 3-night minimum is probably not going to sell well on Expedia or Booking.com. Um, Packaging is also great with Expedia, where you can package in with a flight or a rental car, because I know that most ranches are set a little ways away from the nearest airport. So if people are having to fly in, they may really enjoy some of those bundles. So if you're struggling and you need to get more money in the door, it's worth signing up and seeing what you can do with some of those sites.
So yeah, you're saying it's all about the fit of that channel. So
100%.
while we're on there, then I want to do 2 rounds of announcement for people who may be watching this. People who were there at the Food Ranchers Association convention this year, 2020, may have met with the people over from yonder.com. So it is a new online travel agency that specializes specifically in natural travel, agro-tourism, and they're great for ranches. So many of you are actually already listed there, and Ranch Bookings, which is rebranding to Check-in Sherpa, will be have the premier integration with this, so that your rates and availability flow right to that website. It's no date announced yet. My friend Derek, the CTO, is working with me on this, but we are working on it, and it is coming. The other thing I want to announce is that we have also completed a partnership with a company called KHM Travel, which is what is called a host agency. So they have about 4,800 agents in the US working with them that used to do mostly cruises. We know what happened with that. And now are super excited to be able to sell ranches. So we've had a few webinars in the past, and we have about 50 agents already registered on the platform. And talk to me about it. It's really easy to get started and to list your resort with those guys. So I've been working hard trying to find us the right channels so that we can go far and wide and find the people that will pay our rates, and so that we can just increase our rates more and more and more, because our product in the ranch industry is really worth it. We're not making any more ranches, we're not making any more mountains, so I do think that people need to know about it, need to get out there. Now, one thing that when you start talking about those channels and such, and you touched on this a little bit about most ranches having an all-inclusive rate, and that's super important. That's like the heart of the industry. It's what makes it special. But usually when people use those channels, they also want to be able to have some upsells, things that if you have a travel agent that you're paying 15% commission, you want the agent to help you increase your revenue and help you upsell. So in your experience, how much of a lift can you expect from real people selling your products in terms of helping you upsell?
It's really up to you, because it's going to be directly determined by how much data and information and photography or whatever else you're able to pass on that you're giving to them, because they need to completely understand your resort as if they were there working with you in person, right? So the quality of information that you're passing on to them is huge. There's definitely more room for upselling here. And I think that typically when we look at travel agent reservations for hotels, or consortias, which are essentially just groups of individual travel agents that wouldn't have maybe an agency on their own. So not that much different from KHM. We often find the guests who work through travel agents specifically are actually willing to pay more than guests who are looking through an OTA, which tend to be more of a price sensitive guest. So I definitely agree that you're more likely to get a better average rate, and therefore typically a better profitability, depending what other pass-through costs are related, beyond commissions, if there are any, than you would from an OTA, which is actually charging a much higher commission, typically anywhere between 18 and 25% to be on the major OTAs like Expedia and Booking.com. So it's really important that, number one, you've got the data up there for them in a way that they can visually describe and sell it. And number two, that you're giving them as much access as possible and as many options as possible. So from an upgrade perspective, if you have different room types, for example, that are differentiated by more than the number of people, so obviously a family is going to stay in a family suite, and you're not probably going to upsell two people to a suite that has 4 beds just because it has 4 beds, right? There's no actual value there for them. So you want to make sure that you're differentiating room types in other ways as well. So thinking about either the 2-person traveler or the family traveler, whichever you cater more to, or maybe some of each. What is the kind of the entry level pricing, and then what is the next step up, and can something be added? So maybe if something is only including breakfast and one includes dinner, or one room has a jetted tub in it, or whatever those differentiators are for you, it's really going to depend on how your resort is set up.
Yeah, I think and I don't want anyone listening to this to be angry at me. I'm not offering to kill off the American plan. The lodging, the food, and the horseback riding, that stays. That is the food ranch industry. No one's touching it. But what I'm thinking about is your wine and cheese tasting,
Right.
your astronomy class, your spa, your massages, your yoga session. There's a lot of room, and kind of a captive audience once someone comes to the ranch to upsell some of those things. And so I do think that it's something that I'm not sure that across the industry everyone does well at this. I know that the ones who do that well, though, like the numbers are really speaks for themselves for those guys. And it for some of that stuff, it's not difficult. A wine and cheese tasting is like something that you buy at the store. It can be an easy process, and you can really do some damage there. Um, so if you were to say, like, I think you told me a story about you recently doing some consulting for a resort. You were kind of a secret shopper, and you're trying to see how well people were trained to upsell you also at the resort, and and really try to pull their legs, and they weren't having it. Um, can you tell that story? I'm not telling it very well.
Yeah, for sure. So this was actually for a resort in Mexico, and we had been commissioned because our goal was to focus on total revenue management, which is the optimization of all types of revenue beyond just the actual lodging revenue. And so they had a few restaurants, and they had a world class spa and some activities. And our goal, according to how we were contracted, was to go in and kind of present like a typical, romantic couple looking for a getaway, and that we would purchase and be reimbursed for whatever they were most effectively sold to us. So the funniest part of the story is when we came to this world class spa, and they had more treatments than you've seen probably anywhere, and they had a signature like rainforest experience where you got to go through like 7 different rooms and have multiple treatments. And so we were pretty excited because we figured this is their signature experience. They're for sure going to upsell us on this. So we walked into the spa and said, "Well, what do you have available? We're here for this many days. What kind of appointments can we make? What sort of body treatments or whatever do you have?" And so we left the door wide open, and the receptionist opened a book to the 4 basic massage types: a Swedish massage, a sports massage, a deep tissue, and a hot stone massage. And she said, "Here's our massages. Which one of these would you like?" And basically didn't even give us the option to look at anything else, let alone upselling us. So we were like, well, I don't know. Maybe I know I've done scrubs in the past or something, like even dropping hints, and nothing was working. And we ended up with a standard 50-minute Swedish couples massage because
Yeah.
that was all that they would sell us. So don't ever let your receptionists do that with your revenue.
I mean that's why I think it's so interesting, right? It's this huge resort. You're saying they have several restaurants,
Hmm.
right? And it's something as basic as this. Like we have the premier product, and people aren't even offering it. It's kind of mind-boggling that everything's there for the taking, pretty much. And
Yes.
it's training, and it's systems, and it's processes, and all that stuff that sounds like business buzzwords, but it does matter. I'm sure that if you did some math, internal math, the difference in your bill would have been several $100, and you would have been probably even happier, would you say, had you even been proposed to do the better experience?
Yeah, I think in a 3-night stay, it was a few $1,000s difference. Now, granted, this was a Five Diamond resort, so prices were
Mhm.
high on
Yeah.
each item, but that wasn't even assuming that they sold us the top-notch experience, just that they upsold one category. So we found a few $1 million of revenue per year that they were leaving on the table.
Yeah,
Kind of painful, yes.
that that did pay for your trip, probably,
Yes.
I would expect. So in tell me about like the life of like a revenue manager. So like someone, a revenue manager that works at the resort. What is their day-to-day look like? I'm sure there is like some part of it which is operational, making sure that those people that are tasked with selling your packages and your upsells are actually doing it, making sure that the quality is there and so on. And then there's all the reporting aspect of
Mhm.
looking through that data and making sure that you first have the right data you need and that it's trending the way you want it to. Um, so can you explain a little bit better than I am?
No problem. That's pretty good, though. Pretty good. So the first thing, of course, is we look at history to predict the future, right? So on a day-to-day basis, you're always looking at what actually happened over the last 24 hours, or in some cases, the last week or month, depending what type of analysis you're doing. And what can we learn from that? Either things that went well that we want to repeat, or things that didn't go as well as we'd like that we need to solve for. So understanding where those bottlenecks and gaps really are. We also do a lot of, upgrading of promotion. So we work closely with the marketing team. In some cases, we're as close as we get to a marketing team. Although we always recommend that we have both kind of disciplines covered, revenue managers can do the basics in terms of helping to design promotions or packages or different offers that should capture the attention of your target market. And then it's our job, of course, to, if you've heard the term distribution or e-commerce, those typically also fall within the revenue management realm because we're making sure that those offers or different things are being distributed to every channel that you're working with properly, that they're showing up with the correct rate, they're showing up with the correct descriptions and photography. So really managing that online presence as a whole. And as Matt alluded to, some educational component as well, because we want to educate everybody else within the business to make sure that they understand what is the strategy that we're putting in place, how can they help support us, and how can we help support them. So typically the revenue generating departments like sales, if you sell group tours or anything like that, you may have a sales department. Marketing and revenue management are very close and ideally are working as almost one unit together. We call that commercial strategy, by the way, something we're moving towards in the hotel industry. And of course, operations. We want to make sure that the operational team understands and supports the strategy because, for example, when we talk about upsells, a great opportunity for that is actually at check in. So you want to make sure that your check in reception agents also know what sort of upsells are available at that time and are encouraging guests to make those types of reservations or upsells or whatever the case may be. And typically, we'll try to incentivize them, and you can keep it really simple. Give them a 10% commission on anything they sell at check in, whatever that is, but really making sure that every single piece of the business has this revenue culture mindset. Um, I kind of look at it almost like because I also do some business coaching in other industries on the side. And within that, there's a lot of correlations between revenue management and business coaching. In both, we're looking at business results, we're solving for gaps and opportunities, and we're creating strategy for the revenue overall. And that's very similar to what a business coach does as well. So you might want to think about it like a revenue manager is the business coach that you can actually hire on staff.
So what do you think a hotel, it starts making sense for them to have, their own revenue manager full time? Are we talking, 100 rooms, less than that?
It's interesting because we just met on this too, because we wanted to define, who is our ideal kind of property that we're working with. So we find that the number of rooms actually has a smaller correlation because we've successfully generated additional revenue for properties from 8 rooms all the way up to 500 rooms. And the concepts are very similar. What generally happens is the more manual things are, the more time it's going to take. Right. So if you don't have great technology systems that allow you to extract certain pieces of data and information, or that you're doing everything manually, and let's say your system doesn't communicate with Expedia and Booking.com, and those are large sources of revenue for you, just to use a typical hotel example, then a revenue manager needs to manually make sure that they're loading inventory as well instead of it just coming from the system, which means that it's going to again take a lot longer. So technology is a big piece that determines how much time it's going to take. Another thing is the complexity of your business. If you typically work only with leisure customers, it's pretty much an easy sell. You can raise your rates, but generally speaking, you have a lot of repeat business. That's going to take less time because there's less factors to consider. If, on the other hand, you're 100 units for whatever reason and you have a lot of groups that come in that you need specialty pricing for, or you have a lot of wholesale accounts, that's also different. So it kind of depends on the complexity of the operation when it comes to the types of guests and types of rates that you have out there. And then it just matters if it comes up to 40 hours a week, right? So do you really need somebody there for 40 hours a week? We find that most of our target customers, which are typically in the, let's say, up to 250 rooms, average rates falling somewhere between $99 and $299 for a typical best available rate. Any of those types of properties, we find most of them can be accomplished in 7 hours to 15 hours a week with an actually well-versed, well-oiled machine type revenue management service like ours, just saying. Uh, but that's what we sometimes will call outsourced or fractional revenue management. And it helps because that way you're not paying for a full person, because typically the going salary for a really, really well-versed revenue manager is going to be at minimum $75,000 a year.
So, I do think that, I mentioned a little bit, those 3 or 4 things that someone can do, and, it kind of bridges that gap from not doing anything to, having a full-time person. I think right about now, actually, we're in the midst of it. People are starting to plan for their next season. Some rates are out there, but it's still mostly fungible, and they can reason about them and think about that stuff right now. Um, some people are doing the pack trips and the hunting. Right now, they're having their fun, but soon they'll be thinking about that. What would your recommendations be, to really zero in on, preparing for next season? Um, you know, most people do look at cooperative properties, but how do you do that when you do that for a client?
Well, it's a very interesting question right now, Matt, because COVID-19 has thrown everybody for a loop, and now hotels are asking the same question. So even properties with a lot of data are feeling a little uncertain about what's going to happen in 2021. The good news is, I think that the adventure travel industry in particular is poised to do really well because we actually completed a survey of COVID-19 impacts on many different types of properties over the summer. And one of the things we found was that the properties that were performing the best were actually the upscale to luxury resorts that had activities on site, especially if they were set away from major cities. And that sounds a lot like a guest ranch to me. So there's a huge demand for that out there, and people are treating travel as more of a necessity than they were in the last financial crisis when it was all about, oh, I feel like taking a trip here and there. Now people feel like travel is their right and something that they need to do from a mental health perspective. So I think that the adventure industry can really capitalize that on that going into 2021, and will likely have a very, very strong high season, regardless of what season that is for various areas of the country in 2021. So I would not automatically do any sort of dropping of rates if you typically perform well at the rates that you're doing right now. I'd say maybe try a 10% boost for next year and then start to measure, if possible, when do you normally see a boost in bookings for certain months, and do you see that same boost now? Keeping in mind, however, that people are making a lot more short-term plans now than ever before because of the uncertainty of what's going to happen to their travel. Is somebody going to say, you can't come to my state now because you have a COVID-19 surge in your state? There's a lot of things that are making people uneasy. So being able to be flexible with your cancellation policies as much as possible. If you typically have a 2-week cancellation policy, maybe you want to bring that down to 3 days. If you typically have a 3-day policy, based on what's going on in your market, maybe bring it down to 24 hours. Whatever you're able to accommodate from an operational perspective, guests really are appreciating that additional flexibility. And then just punch up your marketing around your open spaces and how, basically, without even having to say it, how socially distant people can be when they're staying at a guest ranch and still enjoy travel.
Yeah, Steve has his favorite thing that he says. He's probably screaming it at the top of his lungs right now, listening to this: the ultimate social distancing vacation. But that is true. I mean, I think there's when um, I was talking about this KHM travel agency a little while ago. We first started talking to them in January, and the way that we met is because they live, their office is right down the road from ours, and we introduced ourselves and we're like, hey, this is what we do. We're looking at helping our ranches be able to work with travel agents more easily. That's something that we've had requests for. And the person I'm meeting, the VP of partnerships, says like, I'm sorry, we have our hands full with the cruise industries. Like we're not looking at bringing a new vertical or training our agents for this new product. But I would love to tell you all that I know so that you can maybe find someone. So we keep in contact, and of course now they recontacted us somewhere around, I think, May or June, and now it was obvious. Yes, please let us work with ranches. The cruise lines are not gonna uh, recover for a little bit, and people are realizing that the ranch product is something that is hard to get, and has a lot of value. So I'm really excited to be talking to those people, and I really do hope that more ranches take advantage of this, and just realize that we can punch out there with the big guys, especially right now. So yeah, raise your race, everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is the first thing to look at, is where they can actually get uh, rate opportunity, right? That's the easiest, lowest hanging fruit. It would be oversimplification to say that pricing is all that revenue management does, because there's so many other areas that we can focus on. But that is the most obvious, the most impactful, and the most meaningful right off the bat. So using some of the tips that we've talked about today, I hope will help some of these ranchers to find new revenue opportunity, because it turns out when you raise your rate, your expenses don't increase. And so all of that extra money just flows right to the bottom line, which is what we love to see in revenue management or profit optimization. But to your comments about, this opportunity that came because of the cruise industry suffering, for example, it's my firm belief that, a lot of people are saying, boy, 2020 really sucks. And absolutely, 2020 has thrown us for a lot of loops, and it doesn't seem to want to stop anytime soon. But I firmly believe that within every disadvantage, there's an opportunity if we just look hard enough and we approach it with the right mindset. So I encourage everybody who may be feeling a little bit down right now about what 2020 has brought and COVID-19 in general to look for the opportunities within that, whether it's from a learning perspective of ways that you can improve your business, whether it's new opportunity because you're suddenly getting cruise guests or whatever that may be. But I guarantee that every single person listening to this has some new opportunity because of COVID-19 if they just find it and capitalize on it.
Yeah, and ranches, it has been tough. COVID was one thing. There was the fires in Colorado. Some people got flooded. So yeah, you all are in our thoughts. Steve and I, anything that we can do to help you guys, as always, get in touch. We love to help. But yeah, I really do think that there's a huge upshot for the dude ranch industry in the next couple of years. And I just want to do whatever part I can to help us get on it. I think we're getting close to parting words. What is one thing that you would say if you're not doing right now, you're totally missing out, and do it?
Tracking your data. That makes everything else possible. So we talked a little bit about that, but you really want to look at, how many stays you get on a typical day, what average rate those are coming in at, how many people you're turning away on those dates. So having a simple tracking system, even if it's not available to you in a software or something like that, tracking data is the most important thing that you can do to make everything else possible and easier and more efficient. So I'm a big fan of the book, The One Thing, as Matt knows. So the question that they ask there is, what is the one thing that you can do to make everything else easier or unnecessary? And it's having great data. And you're welcome for the segue.
Yes, look at all the data. Look at all the data, you guys. So yeah, we work hard on this. Lily has been an advisor to us for the past few months. And what I have tasked her with is to really help me put all those revenue management concepts at the heart of ranch bookings. And Check-in Sherpa is the new brand we're gonna rename it to. But to really make it easy for you guys to be able to get all that data right at your fingertips. And it's one of those things, growing up at Goosewing, I always saw it. We had spreadsheets, 100 spreadsheets. We had, paper customer satisfaction surveys, all that data. We knew that we needed to collect it, but it's even something else. Like, you need to be able to act on it too. And that's the thing that really drives me is helping you guys have those tools so that you can just pull it up and get out of the office and go play on the ranch. So thank you, Lily, so much for all that you do, and I'm super excited to welcome you to our industry. Hopefully, if the Dude Ranchers Association convention stays on, it is on for 2021 right now. I hope to see you there. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in.
Absolutely. Thank you again so much for having me. And if anybody does have questions about anything we discussed today, please feel free to reach out to me directly at lily@tcrmservices.com. Or since we're all friends here, you can reach out to your contacts here, Matt and Steve, and I know that they'll get those questions to me as well.